Jupiter in the 11th house in Cancer. In this video, we'll look at all the ins and outs of that particular combination, and we'll see how it really works in a real chart using the example of Steve Jobs. So the first step for understanding a planet in a house and a sign is always to understand the planet in the house. In this case, we would want to understand what Jupiter symbolizes when it's in the 11th house. That is exactly what episode 1 of this series was about. So if you want to know all the nuances of it, the link to that video is in the description below. Otherwise, I'll just summarize for you right now. Jupiter in the 11th house symbolizes being wealthy, being a performer or being a person who's quite outgoing, and also being non-authoritarian. Now that we know what Jupiter in the 11th house signifies, we want to find out what Jupiter in Cancer symbolizes. I've also already done the video for Jupiter in Cancer, and I will also put the link to that in case you want to know the nuances of it. The summary of what Jupiter in Cancer symbolizes is the person is familial, they're family-oriented, they're introspective, they're prosperous, and they're optimistic. Now, there's one more step, which is very important that you might overlook. This concerns the lordships that are necessitated by the fact that Jupiter is in the 11th house and it's Cancer. It's not as complicated as it sounds. If Cancer is the 11th house, then Jupiter's signs, which are Sagittarius and Pisces, have to be the 4th and the 7th house. And so if Jupiter is in Cancer in the 11th house, then it means that the 4th and the 7th lords are in the 11th house. And that is an important part of what Jupiter in Cancer in the 11th house symbolizes. So what does it mean to have the 4th and the 7th lord in the 11th house? Well, the 4th house is about privacy and treasure, things that are kept safe. The 7th house is about interactivity and therefore commerce, the way we exchange with other people. And the 11th house is about performance talent and the ability to earn profit. So just look for the ways that these symbolisms make threads that connect the dots between them, and then you'll understand what the 4th and the 7th lord in the 11th house symbolizes. Now, the first thing that I'm going to mention maybe is a little bit difficult to sort out, but because the 4th house is private, but the 11th and the 7th are interactive and outgoing, this combination represents being good at communicating and interacting with people, yet also being kind of quiet about it. Like your communication method is understated. You usually understate yourself, or you understate your emotions, or you understate your opinions, and that is in its way dramatic. Another thing here is you could see that the 4th house is about treasure, the 7th is about commerce, and the 11th is about profit, so this must be pretty good for money. Particularly, it's very good for being able to amass or accumulate money as a result of knowing how to sell things and knowing what to sell. The reason for that is that the 4th house is very good at saving things, and the 7th house is very good at commerce, which means knowing what people want. So having done these 3 steps, we can put all of the symbolism side by side and see how the dots connect between them. Then we will really understand what Jupiter symbolizes when it's in Cancer and in the 11th house. For example, it comes to our attention that Jupiter in the 11th house symbolizes a performer or an outgoing person, yet Jupiter in Cancer is introspective. So it seems like it's kind of clashing. But the 4th and the 7th lords in the 11th house exactly duplicates and unifies that dichotomy. So the end result is really what I explained before, that the person really knows how to relate with other people, how to communicate, how to interact, yet their methodology of doing so is always understated or sort of shy. So I would call them relationship architects. And so their way of interacting with people is sort of measured and careful and exact. Also, you might notice that Jupiter in the 11th signifies being wealthy, and so does Jupiter in Cancer, because that's about being prosperous. And the 4th and 7th lords in the 11th house is about knowing what to sell and being able to amass money from that. So Jupiter and Cancer in the 11th house must be really good for making money. And finally, you also may notice that Jupiter in the 11th house is a non-authoritarian symbolism, while Jupiter in Cancer is familial, and familial structures are authoritarian archetypically. So this is sort of a dichotomy or a clash between Jupiter in the 11th and Jupiter in Cancer. So the outcome of this is that people with Jupiter in the 11th in Cancer have an unorthodox concept of how families should work, or how social organizations should work. And also their personality will feel simultaneously intimate and distant. And that's also amplified by their being relationship architects. So they'll simultaneously feel like an authority and a peer. They'll simultaneously feel like they're open but reserved, and so forth. So the example chart is Steve Jobs. It's always very helpful to have an example chart because it makes these theoretical ideas less vague. You can put a face on these ideas. Like a wealthy person. Why is Steve Jobs so very wealthy? It's exactly because he really knows how to sell things. He knows how to market things. He knows how a commercial should be made, what kind of commercial should be. He knows what people would want to buy. Before anybody else figures it out, he figured it out. Also, he really does kind of put a face on this very complex or vague dichotomy of being intimate yet distant, being an authority yet a peer. And also he does have quite an unorthodox concept of family, how social structures should work, how organizations should work. So why is it that Steve Jobs is really such a useful poster child to illustrate what Jupiter and Cancer in the 11th house is supposed to mean? It's because really Jupiter in the 11th house in Cancer in his chart is fantastically empowered and fantastically significant in the chart. Let me explain why. So his Jupiter in Cancer, of course, is the exalted benefic, and look at the degree that it's at. It's at 21 degrees. There's another planet at 21 degrees. It's Venus, and it's exactly 180 degrees away from Jupiter. So this means that the two benefics, one of which is exalted, are mutually aspecting each other to 100% intensity, thus forming a link between Venus, the lord of the 9th house, and Jupiter, the lord of the 4th and the 7th, thus creating two Raja Yogas by exalted benefics in his 5th and 11th houses, and exactly in the 5th and 11th houses. The next thing is there's another important planet at exactly 21 degrees, and that's Saturn. And so that means Saturn is exactly trine to Jupiter, and you may not think that Saturn has an important trinal aspect, but every planet, if it's at exactly a trine to something else, forms a significant mutual aspect with it. So that means that Jupiter and Saturn are also in a relationship of mutual aspect, and Saturn is the 5th lord. So that means that these Raja Yogas between the 4th and the 7th houses are happening not only with the 9th house, but also with the 5th house. So this chart has just got Raja Yogas everywhere. Another aspect that's going on here with all these 21 degrees is that Saturn at 21 degrees would have an exact 60 degree aspect, which is its trademark, to Venus. And that puts a link between the 5th and the 9th lords, which is also very, very auspicious. Finally, this whole thing, the reason why it's very dominant in the chart, because the ascendant is also basically at 21 degrees. It's rounded off to 22. So that means that all of this business going on with these fabulous mutual aspects is exactly on the cusps of the houses. And Venus is exactly trine to the ascendant. So all of this stuff, all of this interpretation is having a profound effect on the main focal point of any chart, which is the ascendant. So now I think you can see how important it is to understand the theory of what something represents, like what does Jupiter in Cancer in the 11th house represent in isolation, but also see how it works in a particular chart. The theories are like seeds, And the charts are like the people who grow the seeds. So the same seed will grow differently depending on how it's taken care of. In the same way, two different charts that both have Jupiter and Cancer in the 11th house will not produce the same person by any means, because the whole rest of the chart is all different. If you want to understand the whole context of your chart, the soil in which your interpretive seeds grow, then visit my website, vicdecara.com, and click Readings. My complete chart report explains each and every nook and cranny of your chart and will keep you occupied in self-discovery for years. I also have two groundbreaking new reports. The first of these, Your Nakshatra, organizes your active nakshatras in order of their importance to you and presents the fundamental interpretations for the planets that occupy them. And the newest report, Star Strength, uses a system called Tarabala to unfold 90 interpretations of the nuanced relationships between all the planets in your chart, which paints a rich and detailed picture of how your various strengths cooperate or compete with each other. Order these or any of my reports and accelerate your journey to deeper self-understanding.